1. We are all strangers on this planet. Albert Camus was born in Algeria into a French family. You could say he was born in the wrong country. Not just that, his father was French and his mom had a Spanish heritage. He later moved to Paris when it was occupied by the Germans. In some way, he was a stranger in all these places. We humans cannot choose our family, country, language, culture we are born into. For Camus, being a stranger also gave him the opportunity to question his existence. Not just his own, but the entire human existence. What it means to be human and what it means to seek meaning in life. His unique cultural background gave him a unique perspective on life. It's no surprise that he titled one of his novels The Stranger. In essence, we are all strangers on this little rock of a planet. We often get bogged down in cultural differences or dividing people into nationalities, gender, or something else, but fundamentally, we are all strangers trying to come to terms with our existence. We are the true aliens in this world. We have no idea where we have come from, how life started, and how it will end. Yet we don't lose sleep over it. It is what it is. So nobody's at home here. Everyone is a stranger. 2. Be part of a team. The French Revolution had three messages: liberty, equality, and fraternity. While freedom and equality have become buzzwords in politics of socialism versus liberalism, but it's a fraternity that's perhaps less understood. It's more psychological. Albert Camus played football as a teenager, but age 17, illness meant he had to live in isolation. This solitude taught him an important lesson. He was happiest when he was part of something bigger than himself, a team, a tribe, or a group with a single aim working together to achieve something big, be it a football game or even winning a war. Quote, "Everything I know about morality and the obligations of men, I owe it to football." The desire to belong is incredibly strong among us. Despite trying to have a more free and solitary life in today's world, we seek comfort when we are part of a team. We want to be picked by others. To compensate for the fact that Camus couldn't play football after his illness, he joined the Communist Party, which is a tribe in itself. Even after he became a famous writer, he continued to work in the theater to stage works by other writers like Dostoevsky and Faulkner. So for Camus, being part of something bigger than yourself with a unified goal gave him fulfillment. Nietzsche's philosophy set forth in Thus Spoke Zarathustra is that of a lone wolf in a mountain cave, but Camus' philosophy is communitarian. Throughout history, men physically and psychologically survived in tribal settings, and the sense of camaraderie brought them together. But in today's world, it is lost, as families and communities have fallen apart. In the workplace, loyalty and allegiance have become more transactional and less spiritual, which has created loneliness, resulting in an increase in alcoholism, addiction, and consumerism. So being part of something bigger than yourself teaches you loyalty, responsibility, and respect. In return, you feel fulfilled. 3. Create art. Albert Camus studied philosophy to become a teacher, but soon found writing to be his vocation. Just like for Franz Kafka, writing allowed him to cope better with the absurdities of life. In the absence of meaning, one has to create something. He created 4 major novels and many works of non-fiction. Of course, there's debate whether he was a better philosopher than a novelist, but there's no doubt that through writing fiction, he made a dent in the literary universe, which won him the Nobel Prize in Literature. His novels are not meant to be artistic like Proust or thrilling like Dostoevsky, but they make up with philosophical depth. I think Camus also understood storytelling and art are as powerful as food. And I think this shift his attitude towards Marxism and socialism. Marxists have a more utilitarian view of work as a means to an end, so there is no value in the work itself, but what it produces. The artist Camus saw profound meaning in the work, in the creation, in the craft, as well as the final product. Material success can feed your stomach, but the process of art creation can nourish your soul. Since the universe doesn't care, it is incumbent upon us to care and create something meaningful for ourselves. And art is perhaps the best way to give life meaning. By art, I don't mean painting, but it can be any craft. The root of the word art is skilled work or craft, so we can find meaning in our work and craft. Camus even said that living is an art form. Quote, "It takes time to live. Like any work of art, life needs to be thought about." 4. Life's miseries are random. Albert Camus supposedly said that dying in a car accident is the most absurd death. Yet that's precisely how he died. This is not unique in this case. A lot of famous novelists have died in ironic ways. Two of the most famous Russian writers, Alexander Pushkin and Mikhail Lermontov, died in a duel which they had fictionalized in their own novels. Nikolai Gogol went mad, which he had written about in his short story A Madman's Diary. But what's interesting in Camus' case is that he understood that life is, for the most part, pretty random. As a result, pain and suffering are also pretty random. Nobody signs up to be sick, yet age 17 he fell ill. As I said before, he had a train ticket in his pocket when he died, yet he decided to go by car. When we face hardships, illnesses, tragedies, or accidents, we often question the unfairness of it. Yet that's what life is. It is for the most part unfair. Camus died at the height of his fame, only 3 years after winning the Nobel Prize. He was 46 years old. Yet it could have been worse. He could have died aged 17 with tuberculosis. His attitude was to embrace life with its randomness and absurdities. Because the value of life is not in its happiness, but the life itself. Quote, should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? But in the end, one needs more courage to live than to kill himself. Camus' philosophy was that one must accept the absurdities of life, but also its miseries, not by closing your eyes, but... 5. Ignorance is not bliss. Fyodor Dostoevsky and Albert Camus have a lot in common. Both had to deal with the idea of meaninglessness and nihilism that was spreading in Europe. However, Dostoevsky returned to faith and tradition on the one hand and innocence and naivety on the other. So fundamentally, Dostoevsky was against questioning traditions and religions, instead preferred blissful innocence and faith. Camus, however, was an atheist. For him, religion or naivety was not the answer. You had to know the cold, hard truth of life. He didn't believe in God. Unlike Dostoevsky, Camus thought knowledge was liberating. Dostoevsky didn't want Russians to get exposed to bad ideas coming from the West. For Camus, that boat had already sailed. You cannot close your eyes and pretend life is all good and there's a God that would protect you. For Camus, we are not only in the wilderness, but we are the wilderness, and we have to come up with a solid solution in our pursuit of meaning, just as we have to build shelter and find food. But Camus says a cold shower is always better than no shower. So Camus, just like Friedrich Nietzsche, preferred painful truths than comforting lies or blissful naivety. 6. Fearing death is like fearing life. In his first major novel, A Happy Death, Albert Camus talks about two deaths. The first death is the murder of a crippled man, and the second, a natural death after an illness. In this novel, Camus tries to show that we are driven not by our desire to live long, as Schopenhauer said, or dominate others, as Nietzsche argued, but our own desire to be happy. Quote, the craving for happiness seemed to me the noblest thing in a man's heart. In my eyes, that justified everything. But despite his best effort, even committing a murder, he fails to find happiness. But when he faces his own death, he realizes something deeper inside him. Death is just part of life, just another phase of it. Death often means misery, pain, and struggle, yet it can be happy. Just as the Greek philosopher Epicurus said, since we do not and cannot know death, we should not fear it either. It is what it is. The fear of death is like having a monkey on your back, which makes you fear life itself. In two of Camus' novels, when the protagonists face the real prospect of death, they finally realize they are happy. So I guess Camus says, to be really happy, one must fully and completely accept death. Quote, he realized now to be afraid of this death he was staring at with animal terror meant to be afraid of life. 7. One lives in here and now. And the stranger, Meursault, thinks he cannot change things in life. It makes no difference whether he loves his girlfriend or not, moves to Paris or not. He leaves all those things to other people to decide. Quote, mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. Even the most crucial act in the novel, the murder, he says happened because the sun was shining too bright. He lives a dull, indifferent life, does a dull job, and has a dull relationship. You could say Meursault is a typical human animal who lives in here and now, just like millions of us around the world. A good example is Charles Bukowski, who lived his life in somewhat similar fashion. Of course, he didn't murder anyone, but he did live his life as an outsider or a stranger who didn't give an F to anything. He drank, he gambled, had sex, worked dull jobs, and wrote poetry and fiction. He didn't pretend he was a saint and often confessed at being a dirty bastard. Albert Camus shows the animalistic side of a human life. Despite years and centuries of rational thinking being hammered in us through our education system, most of us just live life on a daily basis. We don't think about the future or try not to think about the past. If the past or the future makes us anxious, we use alcohol, drugs, social media to bring us back to the present in order to numb the pain of the past or the anxiety of the future. So in reality, life happens in here and now for the most part. Quote, Mama used to say that one can always find something to be happy about. In my prison, when the sky turned red and the new day slipped into my cell, I found out that she was right. We often think of a glass as half empty. It could be much worse. Meursault in his prison cell, while facing death penalty, finds joy in the shifting sunlight on the prison wall. So happiness is not out there, it is in here and now. It only depends on if you can see it or how you see the world. 8. Crises give us opportunity to become greater than ourselves. In his novel The Plague, Camus pits an individual's desire to be free against society's goal to continue. In other words, an individual animal's desire to live his best life versus the survival of the species as a whole. When the plague hits the town, people want to save themselves and their loved ones. But as the plague persists and more people die, there's a switch, you could call it an evolutionary switch, that is turned on among the people. More people put their own lives on the line to save others. People say tragedies bring people together, wars unite, and plague sharpens our instinct for survival. In this novel, Camus highlights one of the most important aspects of human life, courage. As we are becoming more rational, we become less and less courageous. We put our own survival or interests before everyone else's. However, the history of humanity has been nothing but a series of calamities confronted by courageous deeds of those who came before us. When a society faces a disaster, it takes a little while for us to show our courage. Just like the plague virus that sits deep inside the human species or nature and needs a trigger strong enough to bring it out, human courage is also present deep inside us, and when it's triggered, we rise up to the challenge to become greater than ourselves. The Plague, despite being a despairing novel, is also a hopeful one about human nature. The courage to help others is closely tied to our survival instinct as well as our desire to love others. Quote, to state quite simply what we learn in times of pestilence, that there are more things to admire in men than to despise. In a way, you could argue Camus was responding to the highly individualistic philosophy of Nietzsche, that sometimes the happiness of others can be incredibly meaningful for an individual. A lone wolf artist has his place in human history, but so does a caring individual who sacrifices his or her happiness to bring joy to others. Quote, what is true of all the evils in this world is true of the plague as well. It helps men to rise above themselves. 9. Life is meaningless, but we're happy. Albert Camus in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus confronts the biggest absurdity or contradiction of human existence. Humans seek meaning in life, yet the universe provides no answer. Quote, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. As I discussed earlier, Sisyphus is condemned to endlessly push the boulder up a mountain. We all wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat the same thing tomorrow. I read books, synthesize ideas, turn them into a video, upload, and start a new project, and it goes on and on. Parts of the process I enjoy, but parts of it I dislike and even hate. But I have to do it partly to earn a living, and partly because of this primal human urge, enjoying the struggle itself. If Sisyphus were to look at me, he would think it's as absurd as I see him pushing the boulder. Albert Camus perhaps understood that our religious past has made us a bit soft. Religions offered neat little stories about life's purpose, which got us used to the clear path and solid stories explaining human existence. So once the religious myth is destroyed by science and rationality, we still crave for a new story that explains the meaning of life. But Camus says we should not seek comforting stories about life, but find meaning in its hardship. We should enjoy life not because it's easy, we should enjoy it more because it's struggle. People who stay home all day and do nothing are not the happiest people. The happiest people are those who accept life's struggles. Life is meant to be hard. We're meant to struggle and get on with it. The more you cushion yourself from hardship, the harder life becomes. Sisyphus doesn't crave for a deeper meaning to his so-called futile existence. He finds meaning in the struggle itself, in the work itself. But Camus doesn't stop there. 10. Life is not meant to be a passive acceptance, but an active rebellion. Quote, I revolt, therefore we exist. Albert Camus was torn between two divergent philosophies, the socialist philosophy of Karl Marx and the radical individualist philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. One heavily group-oriented, the other heavily individual. But what both German philosophers had in common was an active rebellion against the modern condition. Marx wanted a revolution against capitalism's inequality, while Nietzsche, on the other hand, wanted a rebellion against Western philosophical tradition of rationality, religion, and nihilism. These two rather opposing philosophies find themselves reconciled in Camus as he brings together the Nietzschean existentialist rebellion seeking purpose with the Marxian social rebellion seeking justice. The young Camus was more drawn to Marxism, but later he rejected revolution in favor of reform and became more Nietzschean in his philosophy. In his novel, The Stranger, Camus raises an important development in modern societies. Man's spirit of rebellion is broken through psychological infliction of guilt. To be human, one must cry. Throughout history, whenever an army conquered a place, they often killed all the men. Why? Because able-bodied men were dangerous to the new rulers. For the same reason, most people in jail are men, because men risk more to rebel or break the law. So modernity needs to tame men to conform, which kills men's creative energy as well as rebellious spirit. For Camus, our desire to be creative and find meaning in life goes hand in hand with our deep desire to fight injustice, inequality, repression. He saw an overlap between fighting for justice and being creative, both demanding a rebellious spirit which is getting crushed in the modern world. Camus says, I draw from the absurd three consequences, my revolt, my liberty, my passion. For Camus, human courage or heroism is a form of artistic rebellion seeking clarity. Life is not meant to be passive, so we must be active rebels who push boundaries. That's what he did through his writings. Albert Camus dedicated his life to writing novels and essays in an attempt to find a non-religious meaning. He finally settled on a simple idea. Life is not about finding meaning, but being content or even happy that it has no meaning. It's liberating to know that there is no grand purpose we have to adhere to or be bound by. He found his purpose in playing football, writing stories and essays, producing plays, inspiring others, and pushing boundaries of human intellect. It doesn't matter which destination you have in mind, it is the dedication that matters, the process, the work itself. Sisyphus does the most futile job in the world, pushing a boulder up a mountain, knowing that it will fall back down, but he takes the job on the chin and keeps pushing. A river water only turns into a bog or quagmire and starts stinking when it stops moving. So life is meant to be lived to the fullest. Push as hard as you can, and that should bring you joy and contentment. Because life itself is the biggest gift. Nothing else matters. Thank you for listening.